Today, we're looking back at every Nintendo Switch controller we featured, and it's going to start with my personal top 10 favorites. This includes traditional controllers, split pad style, itty bitty ones, attachable ones, detachable ones, obviously, and a few fight sticks. Also, at least for this one, I'm not cutting it down. I'm giving you everything marathon style. So sit back, strap in, peel your eyes back, and relax. But don't fall asleep, because I will be checking in on you along the way. The auto captions always get it wrong, but I'm Sergio AM. Welcome to It Came From a Box. This is PowerA's Nano Enhanced Wireless Controller, and it's the most adorable controller we've ever used. It's about 15, maybe 20% smaller than a regular controller, yet retains standard size buttons and controls, all of which my large hands can still easily access. On here we have smooth analog sticks, a textured and slightly concave D-pad, rounded face buttons that are a bit mushier than I'd like, nicely sized shoulder buttons, and curved out springy triggers. Then over on the back, we have two advanced gaming buttons that you can map other buttons to. Aside from that, it's wireless with a 20-hour battery life that charges via USB-C. It also has motion controls, which I personally love, especially for first-person shooters, but sadly, no rumble. And finally, it also comes with a pouch to take it on the go. I love this controller. This is such a fun size that remains functional with my large hands, but it's also one of the best options for those with smaller hands. With the release of the N64 games on the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, Nintendo went a step further with a re-release of their iconic, futuristic-looking N64 controller, but with a few upgrades. It's about the same size as the original and even feels identical in hand. It's just as odd as I remember it, albeit a bit heavier because it's now wireless with a rechargeable battery. Quality is top-notch, the buttons feel great, very responsive, the analog stick is pretty stiff but easy to control, let's hope it stays that way, and sadly, there's no expansion port. It's sealed off, which means you won't be able to use your old Rumble or expansion packs with it, but it does have Rumble built in for compatible games, and you can use suspend points to save your game. As for what's new, at the top we now have a USB-C port for charging, buttons for sync, capture and home, ZR to access the suspend menu, but there's no X, Y, plus, or minus buttons, and you can't even remap it, which makes it incompatible or at least difficult to use with most other Switch games. So compared to awkwardly using the Joy-Cons or Pro Controller, this is by far the best way to experience these games. Now, is it worth it? As a nostalgic collector whose childhood was heavily impacted by the N64, it's a yes for me, but because it's tied to the pricey NSO expansion pack where you don't own the games, along with a few other issues, as much as I love it, it's hard to recommend for most people. This massively tiny controller is 8BitDo's Micro Gamepad for the Switch, and it lives between their Lite 2 and Zero 2. You can get it in either blue or this green. It weighs next to nothing, and it's about 2.5 inches in size. As for features, it's multi-platform compatible, it's wireless with a 10-hour battery that charges via USB-C, but you can also use it wired. On top of that, it also works with their Ultimate software, where you can remap just about every button on here, along with keyboard inputs for Android and iOS that you can get creative with. Now at this size, it doesn't have motion controls or rumble, and no, it can't wake the Switch, but it does come with a silicone lanyard. That's just a bit too small for me. On here, we have 16 inputs that include all our basic buttons, which feel high quality and clicky, and we have an accurate D-pad, but no analog sticks, so this is mostly aimed towards 2D games. In my big hands, yes, it's cramped, but it works well, and it's best to see it as an adorable backup controller that you can keep in your Switch kit. Breaking ranks from the traditional controller design is PDP's little wireless controller. At first glance, similar to 8BitDo's SN30 Pro, it's inspired by the OG SNES controller with a similar shape and that gray and purple color scheme from the US version. It's also, little, which makes it perfect to take on the go, and what's really impressive is that the layout isn't cramped. It actually fits well in hand with this extra spacing off the sides and a textured back to keep your grip. We have thin L and R buttons and short curved out triggers, large rounded face buttons, an awesome wide concave D-pad that's very precise, and full-size tall and grippy analog sticks with a longer travel distance that works really well in shooters. That aside, it's also wireless with a 40-hour battery life that, unlike their Faceoff controllers, charges via USB-C. And the cherry on top, it also has motion controls. All that in this tiny package is what makes the little wireless controller a contender for one of the best new controllers we've used. We missed out on 8BitDo's N30 arcade stick, but now they're back with a new one that drops the N30. This is simply their arcade stick. It's got the same retro-inspired NES aesthetic, and although it's smaller than a traditional fight stick, it weighs just as much, if not more, which helps keep it from moving around. So we have a traditional layout with a ball-top joystick that has satisfying micro switches, 8 slightly mushy buttons on the right, 2 dedicated macro buttons above, and all of those can be customized via their Ultimate software. Then on the top left here, we have knobs, switches, and buttons for options and settings such as mode switch that visually changes the layout, a control stick switch, pair, turbo, and home buttons, but sadly not one for capture. Then as you can see, it's wireless via Bluetooth or a dedicated 2.4 GHz dongle that's included and housed in this compartment at the top. But enthusiasts, don't worry, you can also use it wired with the included very long USB to USB-C cable. Finally, the quality of the parts are pretty good, especially at this price, but if you want to go further, it's also very mod-friendly, so you can easily upgrade them to your liking. That aside, so far it's been incredibly fun for retro games and fighters, and due to that versatility, it's become a new favorite.
I can safely say that the Pro Controller ranks as one of the best controllers I've personally ever used. Considering we have the Joy-Cons, this isn't really necessary, but once you try it, I feel like you may just be convinced. First, it gives us a traditional layout that many are accustomed to, and it's a size which really feels comfortable in hand. It has these nice plastic grips that almost feel like rubber, and it's covered in these small dimples which help keep it from sliding in your hands. And like the Joy-Cons, it also has the same motion control support, HD rumble, and NFC reader for amiibos, but it lacks the IR reader. So on it, you have nice and big responsive face and shoulder buttons, bigger analog sticks which are surprisingly buttery smooth, I love these things, and what some will consider to be the most important feature, a D-pad. It's actually a bit tough, and I've read here and there that some people don't like this D-pad, but I personally don't really have an issue with it. So yeah, I highly recommend it. It's my favorite way to play the Switch next to handheld mode.
Retro Fighters is back with a pro version of their GameCube-inspired BattlerGC. You can get it in black, this purple, as well as a limited edition crystal, which looks incredible, but there's only 2,000. It's multi-platform compatible, works for the Switch, PC, and with the included adapters, you can also use it, obviously, with the GameCube, as well as the Wii and Wii U. It's wireless with a 10-hour battery that charges via USB-C. It can connect via Bluetooth or 2.4 GHz with either their USB or GameCube adapter. While the first version had this hollow, lightweight feel, the Pro has a great weight to it. On the back, we have this grippy micro texture, and it has one of the best ergonomic designs I've used, with this sculpted grip that really gives you that locked-in feel. Very secure. The layout is clearly GameCube-like. We've got that rounded group of face buttons that have a similar mushiness to the original. They work well. The analog sticks, compared to the original, are just about the same size, same design, including the C-stick. They even have that texture at the tip of the nip. And both have octagonal gates, which give you that kind of satisfying confirmation at each direction. Oh, and feel free to slam these around in Smash Brothers because they use Hall effect joysticks, so no need to worry about them eventually drifting. And they take just the right amount of pressure to click in. The D-pad is big, slightly rounded, with a good pivot. It has clicky KL switches, and so far, it's been pretty accurate. Up top, we have our L and R buttons, along with thin Hall effect triggers with a similar travel distance to the originals. They're dual stage, so we have that analog pull with a digital click at the end. And yes, those are also KL switches in there. New to the Pro model, we now have 2 back buttons here that you can program. It also has an adjustable rumble, and an X input to D input swap function. And you'll be glad to know that yes, it has very accurate motion controls. Overall, it's an awesome Nintendo Switch controller that I love for Smash Bros. Ultimate, but it's also become my favorite to use with the GameCube and Wii. Best part, it's so easy to swap between them. The Nitro Deck is back, but this time with a plus at the end. If you're new to it, it aims to enhance handheld mode on the Nintendo Switch with a more ergonomic controller that's packed with a long list of features. Their packaging is always top-notch, really well done. In the box, you get detailed paperwork, a fancy velvety pull-string bag with the Nitro Deck Plus inside. Not included is their USB-C to HDMI adapter that's sold separately, which I'll get back to soon. Same as before, the console slides right in with a perfect fit. On the first version, I didn't experience this, but some users mentioned that their consoles would scratch in here, so now it seems they increased the thickness of that rubber tab on the sides to help keep the console away from the back here, but I wish they added more or went with a felt material such as with Retro Flag's controller. Another problem they addressed was ejection. It was awkward before because you needed a lot of force and there wasn't anything to grip, so now the eject button literally pushes the console off the USB-C port, which eliminates that issue. Once it's in, the Switch powers the controller with a lag-free connection. We still have access to all our buttons, ports, and vents, but not the kickstand or memory card slot, and although the USB-C is blocked, we have an input port on the back for pass-through charging. Also, it's picked up as a wired Pro controller, which means you can remap buttons through the console settings, but you can also do that through the Cracked app. Let's talk design and ergonomics. Next to the original, the Nitro Deck Plus looks almost identical, which means it's compatible with their carrying cases and stick tops, but this time around, they swap locations of the right analog stick and face buttons, and it's in a new colorway, that being clear white or this black. I'm a sucker for transparent devices, so I love this. It looks awesome, and I like the little details such as how the metallic purple cap looks through that shell. But for some reason, they kept the back solid. Wish it was transparent like with the previous limited run edition. Build quality, as I've come to expect with Cracked, is very premium. It's mostly plastic, but the pieces are well made and put together. It also has that same bubbly shape that's more ergonomic than the Switch, but also slightly heavier. The grips on the back are curvy with this micro texture, and although they feel good in hand, once you switch off those lower inputs, it starts to feel cramped unless you loosen your grip. So yes, now we have symmetrical analog sticks, which took my muscle memory a bit of time to get used to. This setup is comfortable to use and works well with games with a lot of camera movement, but as someone who plays a lot of games that rely heavily on those face buttons, that lower position is still awkward. Like I said with the original, and it still applies here, I know they're trying to keep to this size, but extending the grips and slightly shifting the inputs would fix that. Until then, one way around it is to remap those face buttons to the back buttons. Let's talk inputs. Most of them are about the same aside from a few things, but let's go through them for those new to it. We have all our miscellaneous buttons, minus, plus, capture, and that home cracked button. Over on the back, we have the program and reset buttons. The face buttons, they're a good size, very sturdy and springy. The shoulder buttons are wide, a tad bit loose, but work well all throughout. The triggers are a little wider with a slight curve. They're glossy with a medium length travel distance that I wish was shorter. The pull is a bit mushy towards the end. It would have been nice for them to add something like a tactile actuation so you can really feel when you reach it. The Dpad is still a favorite. It sticks out a lot due to this deep ridge for your thumb to sit in so you can easily move around it, and so far, it's been very accurate. To help keep your fingers on the analog sticks, we have our 4 back buttons that you can either remap or use with their macro recording feature. They're thin, curved around the grips, and positioned so you can easily reach them with your middle and ring fingers. Now as for what's new, we have these clicky sidekick buttons next to the analog sticks. They're great for unimportant things that you don't need in the middle of a game, because to use them, you need to either move your thumb off the sticks, which resets them and stops your movement, or curl your index fingers. So they're nice to have, but they're not as useful for intense gameplay as the back buttons. And finally, the analog sticks are the same size, they're still swappable for any of their others, but 2 things. First, they now come with these domed stick tops that are super grippy that really help with control. And second, they now use drift-resistant Hall effect joysticks, something that's becoming an industry standard at this point. In use, they feel about the same as before, they're very smooth with good resistance, and they have a very minimal dead zone that you can reduce further with a setting on their app. I already covered features like the updated eject system, the Hall effect joysticks with new default grippy tops, and the remappable back and sidekick buttons, but it has a few others as well. Same as the OG, we have that awesome friction kickstand that stays in place at every angle and extends all the way back. We still have accurate motion controls and adjustable rumble. We also have basic on-the-fly turbo, but still no auto fire. Like remapping, you can still assign macros to the back or sidekick buttons, but you can't record things like delays or adjust the length of time between inputs. And I saved the best for last, that being that it's now pretty much a portable dock. With a USB-C to HDMI adapter, which is sadly not included, you can connect it to the output port back here, and on the input port, you can power it with an AC adapter, such as the one for the Switch. Then you can connect it to an external display. If that's not enough, you can even use the Nitro Deck Plus as a wired controller. Love this feature, I requested it before, and I'm glad they delivered. Last on the list, their app. Since the first Nitro Deck, it's gotten much better. I've covered their True Collection system before, but to keep it short, all their controllers have a unique NFC tag, which you can scan into their app to add to your collection. This gives you digital proof of ownership along with info like rarity and set number, but the star of the show is their control feature that lets you adjust settings right in the app. It connects via Bluetooth, and on here you can easily update its firmware, remap all those buttons including the back and sidekick buttons. You can adjust trigger sensitivity from low, medium, and high, test the analog sticks, and enable that no dead zone mode I mentioned earlier, and adjust rumble from low, medium, and high, either individually or combined. The UI is clean and easy to use, but same as before, I wish they added support for macro recording, and while we're there, why not throw in turbo toggles with auto fire? I've checked out a lot of split pad controllers, but this is the one I've waited on the longest, which is also the one you all recommended the most. In the box, you get the manual, an extra set of white faceplates that attach magnetically, a traditional cross Dpad that you can swap out for the attached circular one, a set of octagonal analog stick rings, and the controllers themselves. Now sadly, there's no sign of an adapter to connect them so you can use them like a traditional controller, but that's not a huge deal. I also got my hands on two of their faceplate kits that come in these tin boxes. In here we get the shells. I went with their pastel light purple and a light blue, but you can also get them in pink. Then we get two extra pairs of stick tops, as well as a colored set of D-pads. Finally, I also got their carrying case. It's hard shell, and inside it has 10 game card slots on this screen protecting flap. Underneath, we have space for a few accessories, and we have a strap to help eject the console. It's pretty generic, but it gets the job done, and if you don't have a bag or case for these, I'd highly recommend it because you don't want to get them damaged when you're on the go. The controllers have this organic, bubbly, dare I say, chubby design, and this HD version comes in black with an extra pair of white faceplates, which would be awesome to customize. But, like I said, you can also get them in different colors to mix and match. In all black, they're a bit plain, but they look much better when either mixed together or with those colored shells. As you can see, they're angled out, and on the rear we have curvy grips with a texture that wraps all around the back. They also have a good weight to them, and altogether, they feel very comfortable to hold, and as you can see, they're just the right size for your thumbs to easily reach every input. Now the plastic they used feels very good quality. It doesn't feel cheap and hollow like some of the others I've tested. Quick look around and you can see that they're also pretty well put together with a very nice fit. No loose or janky parts, but I did notice that there's a bit more friction when attaching them on the rails of the Switch, especially on that left one. But I guess if anything, it does give you a snug fit. Let's talk buttons and sticks. The main face buttons are, I'd say, a medium size. They're not too wiggly, not too high, and as you can hear, they're clicky. That's because every button on here are on Omron micro switches. That makes them super clicky with a tactile feel that is just so satisfying to use. But they are a bit loud, so they're not the best to use at a library or funeral.
Well, I guess that depends on the funeral.
Up top, we have nicely sized shoulder buttons that work well all the way throughout. And we have wide triggers that curve upward with a very small travel distance. Then on the rear, we have the best back buttons I've tested in a while. They're well positioned, but these actually stick out and work well all throughout. We also do have all our miscellaneous buttons, along with these program ones for those extra settings. And we have reset holes on the back down here. The analog sticks are about the same size as the ones on the official Joy-Cons, but they're longer with grippy stick tops, and underneath we have metal wrap sticks to prevent them from wearing down. And you'll be glad to know that yes, they're Hall effect joysticks, so drift is out of the equation. They have a good resistance, and they're also easy to click in. And remember, we do have the option of using those octagonal stick rings if you prefer. As for the extra pair of stick tops, sadly, they're all the same size, but I guess it's nice to have some extra ones just in case. As you saw, we have two options for the D-pad. The traditional cross, or this circular one, which is my preference since it's so easy to travel around. The pivot on here is a bit steeper than I'm used to, but it works really well, and it's also using those micro switches. Now let's talk features. They're wireless with a 2500 milliamp battery that should give you about 15 hours of playtime. Unlike some of the others, they don't have USB-C ports, so you can only charge them via the rails when attached to the console. Now, like the Joy-Cons, they work in all three modes, that being in handheld, tabletop, and TV mode. They can wake the switch, they can be used as individual controllers, albeit with a bit of an awkward layout. They've got motion controls, and yes, they have rumble, but inside we actually have Alps linear motors, which gives us HD rumble. Very rare to see on a third-party controller, and it actually works really well, if not better than the official ones. Another rare addition, these actually have NFC support for Amiibo. Very cool. Now, they're also compatible with their app, but I couldn't get it to work with my phone. With it, you can tweak settings, update firmware, remap those back buttons to any other, and more. So here's hoping they keep updating it, because I'd love to test that out with them. Now, these next features, like with all these split pad style controllers, keep in mind that these settings only apply to the individual controller you set them on, since they cannot communicate to one another. So for example, if you use turbo on the left one, it'll only apply to the inputs on that specific controller, so that makes something like macros a bit awkward. First, we have an on-the-fly turbo function with an auto or continuous fire mode. You'd be surprised how many other controllers leave that function out. If that's not enough, it goes further with a 3-speed adjustment. Very nice. And finally, we also have a macro feature that lets you assign those recordings to the back buttons, but it goes further with a very useful looping feature that you can toggle on and off with a double tap. This is awesome, especially with games that have you farming or grinding a lot of repetitive, annoying tasks. So who is this for? I mean, clearly it's for anyone who wants a premium version of Joy-Cons. That being those who like the versatility of this split pad style and a more ergonomic design. It makes handheld feel awesome, but you can still use them individually. As for games, thanks to those micro switches, it's fantastic for just about any that requires quick and precise inputs. That being intense games such as shooters, since you still have motion controls, fighters, thanks to that D-pad, especially the circular one, and even platformers or roguelikes thanks to those inputs and analog sticks. Now, if all you play are slow or turn-based games, yeah, it works, but it's sort of overkill for that. This is 8BitDo's new and highly anticipated Ultimate Bluetooth controller. In the box, you get your paperwork, a USB-A to USB-C charging cable for the included charging dock, with 8BitDo's USB 2.4 GHz adapter inside, and the controller itself. It's pretty much on par with the SN30 Pro 2, but in this new form factor, and it can now wake the Switch with a shake. Quirky way of doing it, but I love the idea of shake it to wake it. It's available in white and black. The design is very safe and generic. Love it or hate it, they've abandoned the retro-inspired look for this modern, rounded design, but the build quality is still top-notch. In hand, it feels great. First thing I noticed are the very textured grips on the back. While we're here, we've got two remappable paddle buttons that work well, and a switch to change between Bluetooth or 2.4 GHz. Up top, we have small but thick shoulder buttons. Same for the triggers, which have a long travel distance, and they are analog but only work as digital for the Switch. On the front, we have glossy face buttons with a good firmness to them. In the center, we have buttons for start, select, home, capture, and one for your profiles. The thumbsticks are great, very grippy with smooth motion, and they click in just fine. But this time around, the layout is asymmetrical, which I prefer, and we have drift-resistant Hall effect sticks, similar to the ones on the KingKong 2 Pro we last featured, which use a magnetic contactless sensor that avoids that wear and tear, which gives you drift. So it's compatible with the Switch and PC. It's wireless, connects via Bluetooth 5.0 or 2.4 GHz with the included USB adapter, and you can also use it wired. It's got intense but adjustable rumble, accurate motion controls, a turbo function that you first have to assign, and it's got a 22-hour rechargeable battery that you can juice up with either the USB-C port up top or on the included multifunctional dock. The controller drops right in and attaches to the contact pins to charge. When removed, it turns on, and it also houses that 2.4 GHz adapter that you can use in or out of the dock. Finally, as with all their new controllers, you can customize just about everything with their ultimate software. You can remap the inputs and assign turbo, change the dead zone on the thumbsticks with swap options, same for the triggers, adjust the strength of the two vibration motors, create detailed macros that you can then assign to a button, and you can then save all that to 3 profiles that you can switch between via that button on the front. Finally, there are 2 issues. One, there's no NFC for Amiibo, which isn't a big deal, you can just use the Joy-Cons for that. And 2, unlike most of their other controllers, this one's only compatible with the Switch and Windows. But there is a similar option without Bluetooth that supports Windows and Android. A bit confusing, so make sure you get the right one. So it may not be the best looking controller, nor does it have the most exciting name, but it's priced the same as the official Pro controller with much more features. That alone makes it a no-brainer. It's easily one of the best controllers you can get for the Switch. So those are my top 10 favorite Nintendo Switch controllers, but now I want to know yours, so drop them in the comments while you watch the rest of this video, and I'll respond as soon as I see it. Now let's move on by going back in time.
So first up, Joy-Con controllers. Not much to say here that I didn't already say in the review, but the first reason I picked up an extra pair was to have enough for 4 players. That's the beauty of the Joy-Cons. You don't have to buy 3 additional controllers, just 1 more since they split up into 4. Yes, they're still a bit pricey since there's a lot of tech in there, but there's not much else we can do about that. The second reason is because the colors are also the opposite of the ones that come with the Switch Neon version. That means we can have 2 blue Joy-Cons or my favorite, 2 red.
Wow, that was an old one.
Then you should check out the HORI Pokken Tournament DX Pro Pad. This controller was originally made for the first release of Pokken Tournament on arcade and then on the Wii U. The Switch version is just about the same, but you can also use it with other games. It's a wired controller that's nicely sized, lightweight, and it has large ergonomic handles which feel amazing in hand. Now the face buttons are very large and responsive. Then at the top you have huge, easy to use L and R triggers. And in the middle we have the repositioned ZL and ZR buttons right next to select and start. Now this Dpad is one of the best we've found for the Switch. It has a nice concave design with rounded corners which make it easy to push from one direction to the next. In our experience, it's been extremely accurate, it's very responsive, and it's also silent. The one we picked up was the HORI Real Arcade Pro 5 Hayabusa. At $150, the Wrap line has become a trusted name in the fighting community for being a budget stick that's well designed and constructed, and I can easily see why. So what do we have here? First thing you'll notice is that overwhelming Nintendo red. Next, this wide angular design so it can comfortably sit on a table or your lap, and it won't budge due to these friction pads underneath. While we're down there, you'll see that on the front we have a cutout which acts as a handy handle. Yes, I went there. Back up to the top left, we have that nice and big cable compartment with an open channel for that cable, which by the way, is just under 10 feet long. Now the joystick is pretty good with their own square gate that offers a nice tactile response, but I did find it to be a bit loose. As for the buttons, they're in a Vuelix layout, which as a wide-shouldered, large-handed guy works well, and these are HORI's proprietary slim Hayabusa buttons with a matte finish.
Personally, I do enjoy slapping these down. They seem faster to actuate, but they're not as firm as some may like. Finally, all the other buttons can be found on the right. You have your home and capture buttons, minus and plus, as well as turbo, button reassignment, and you can even choose between digital or analog inputs, tournament mode, and yes, this fight stick does work with PC by simply hitting that switch. Overall, although I can't fit it on screen, this thing is a winner. It's a joy to use, and it honestly feels like it enhances the experience of not only fighters, but other arcade-style games. My gosh, look at how young I was. I only had one kid back then. I have 3 now. So, yeah, moving on. Because you can never have enough Zelda-themed products, here's PowerA's officially licensed enhanced wireless controller featuring awesome Breath of the Wild artwork of, well, Princess Zelda. Now, of all the third-party controllers out there, and there's a lot of them, where does this one fall? Well, to sum it up, it's a slightly less expensive Pro Controller alternative. It's been available in a few very nice looking designs and color schemes, but this one is the latest, along with a few upgrades. Starting off, the design is beautiful. The white exterior really stands out, and it's the perfect way to display that Zelda artwork. Matching those colors, you have gold buttons throughout, along with a reflective blue metallic D-pad. I'm guessing it matches the blue she wears in-game, or maybe the blue found in the Silent Princess flower, which is on the bottom right. So, compared to the Pro Controller, it's a bit larger in hand, but lighter in weight, and it feels familiar considering it's just about the same layout. All the face buttons and triggers work well, the D-pad is a bit mushy but in a good way, and the analog sticks are buttery smooth. We haven't experienced any ghosting with them, and they're very snappy to reset. Now let's talk features. First, unlike Nintendo's Pro Controller, this one does not have HD rumble, NFC for amiibo, nor rechargeable batteries. Instead, it runs on 2 AA's, which are included and should last about 30 hours. Moving on, the Bluetooth 5.0 wireless connection is very solid. We haven't experienced any lag or disconnects, and you can also use it as a generic controller with other Bluetooth compatible devices. The next feature, which I think every third-party controller needs, is motion controls. Why? Well, some games use it in a gimmicky fashion, but in games like Breath of the Wild, Fortnite, or other shooters, the motion controls can enhance your aiming and gives you an advantage very similar to that of a mouse. Finally, on the back of the controller, you have 2 advanced gaming buttons which you can program on the fly. To do so, hold down the program button down the middle for 5 seconds. The laryngectomy LED will begin to flash. You then press the input you want programmed, followed by the advanced gaming or AG button you want, and you're good to go. This is a useful way to rebind a button that you're always using or that you want to better position, because these AG buttons fall right under your middle finger. For example, we like using them to remap our analog buttons because I just hate pressing in analog sticks. So like in Fortnite, you can just spring and crouch using those back buttons instead of clicking in the analog sticks, which can throw off your movement. Not everyone's going to use this feature, but I definitely feel it's worth giving it a try. So it looks great. If you have the previous Link version of this controller, this one makes for the perfect companion, but most importantly, we think it's the best third-party alternative to the official Pro Controller. The Joy-Cons are crammed with all kinds of cool tech, but instead of a D-pad, we have buttons, so things like diagonal inputs can be difficult and it just doesn't feel the same. Well, HORI's back to save the day with their D-pad controller. It's available in 3 designs, Zelda, Mario, and the latest. To use it, you just slide it on and it simply works. But although it looks like a Joy-Con, it's missing 3 core features to keep the price low. First, it doesn't have a battery, which means it's not wireless and only works when connected to the Switch. So it's exclusive for handheld mode. Second, it doesn't have motion controls. And third, there's no HD rumble. But onto the D-pad. It's good. It's slightly concave in design and there's no texture to it, which makes it easy to navigate around. I also love the size of it. It's not too big, not too small, but it is positioned a bit low, which makes it feel cramped. And let's be honest, there's not much they can do about that. As for performance, we found it to be very accurate and responsive, especially with fighting games where you have to perfectly time diagonal inputs. So if you play a lot of fighting games, puzzle games, platformers, any game that can benefit from the precision of a D-pad, this is definitely worth having around.
Smash Bros. Ultimate is just a few weeks away, and as is becoming tradition, Nintendo is once again re-releasing another edition of the legendary GameCube controller. It's only available in black, and as you can see, it looks identical to the original, except for the longer cable. This one's 9 feet compared to the old, which is 6 feet, and the logo in the middle. Now, for the most part, everything feels just about the same, and apparently so are the internals, but then you still have some users reporting issues with quality control, like stiff buttons or drifting. As for myself, I haven't had any problems. Using them side by side, the old and the new, I can't really tell the difference, but then again, I'm a casual player, so maybe I won't notice things like snapback, XY offsets, things like that. Now, if you're still on board, the last thing you'll need to use these with the Switch is the GameCube controller adapter. It connects via 2 USB ports to the dock, and it allows you to connect up to 4 GameCube controllers, new or old. But if you had another adapter, you can connect up to 8 controllers and let the chaos begin.
I completely forgot those controllers existed. I don't even know where I put them.
So the collector in me finally caved and pulled the trigger on Nintendo's official NES Switch controllers. These launched alongside the paid Nintendo Switch Online subscription service that includes a growing library of classic NES games. Also, you can only purchase them if you're a subscriber, so keep that in mind. Now, they look identical to the originals, same colors and button placement except, they're wireless, but also at the top, they have the same rail as the Joy-Cons. That's because they charge when connected to the Switch in this very awkward first-gen Apple Pencil way. Now, for those wondering, yes, they actually work when attached, but they're limited to the functionality of a single NES controller. Now, for NES games, it's perfect. It just takes you back in time. They work exactly as you remember, very nostalgic. We've been playing a lot of The Adventure of Link, and yes, it's just as infuriating as I remember, but these controllers are also great for other classic-style games that don't need more than a D-pad and 2 buttons. Next up, we featured this controller in our last video and had to add it to this list. This is PowerA's wireless GameCube controller. To keep it short, it feels almost identical to the OG GameCube controller and with a very similar layout except for a few additions. We have the capture, home, plus, and minus buttons in the center. At the top, instead of a single Z button, we have 2 L and R buttons with the triggers for Z, L, and ZR. And unlike the original, the analog and C sticks click in as buttons. Now, a few cons. First, it's not rechargeable. It runs off of 2 AA batteries which last 30 hours. Next, it doesn't have rumble or NFC for Amiibo. Finally, the triggers are digital, not analog, which is a bummer, but to be honest, little to no games make use of it on the Switch. Cons aside, it remains a favorite due to the nostalgic, the legendary GameCube design that just works so well, especially for Smash Bros. Also, that little D-pad is actually very solid for fighting games. Now, we spend a lot of time searching for the latest and greatest stuff for you guys, and every once in a while we stumble upon a truly hidden gem. This is the Switchpad Pro wireless controller by Surge. And I'm gonna say it on the record, this is the current best Pro controller alternative out there. Here's the quick rundown. It has the same button layout as the Pro controller, but it weighs less and the ergonomics feel slightly better in hand. On top of that, it has a 20-hour rechargeable battery, the strongest rumble we've experienced, and it also has motion controls. The construction is solid, but with a generic design. The buttons are made of a glossy plastic that makes the D-pad much easier to navigate. It also has a turbo function and 4 extra buttons on the back that you can program with macros. All that for $30. What? First up is the highly requested Split Pad Pro by HORI. These chunky Joy-Con alternatives give handheld mode a full-size controller upgrade. First thing you'll notice is that they're big. I'm talking Game Gear big. Although the build quality is pretty solid, they feel a bit hollow, and that's because unlike the Joy-Cons, these don't have batteries. Instead, they're powered by the Switch, which means they only work in handheld mode. Once attached, it makes the Switch look massive and really wide, which kills off its portability, but feels so much better in hand due to their size and the grips on the back, which are subtle with a nice texture that makes them easy to hold. Another factor is that everything on them is bigger. We have large trigger, shoulder, and face buttons along with wide analog sticks, but don't worry, the D-pad is normally sized. Then we have a few other features. There's an on-the-fly turbo button which works really well and you can change the speed of. Then on the back we have 2 extra buttons which you can assign buttons to. And finally, this thing is dock compatible. Alright, all that's great, but there are a few things missing, such as NFC for Amiibo, the IR camera, HD rumble, and the biggest bummer, motion controls. So with the Split Pad Pro, you're trading off those things for a more traditional and comfortable gaming experience, but to be honest, it does feel worth it. Following 8BitDo's popular SN30 Pro is the SN30 Pro Plus. We went with the blacked out version, but they also have Super Nintendo and Game Boy editions. Like the previous iteration, it's retro inspired with the same button layout along with centered analog sticks, a turbo function, and one of the best D-pads we've come across. But the Plus adds a few new features such as these grips that enhance the ergonomics, curved out analog trigger buttons that are easy to use, and it's completely customizable via their new Ultimate software. On top of that, like most of 8BitDo's controllers, it's also compatible with multiple platforms. That altogether makes this one of the best controllers for the Switch, and if you want all the details, watch our full review by clicking the info card above or the link in the description below. For those of you who love fighting or retro games but want something a bit smaller than a fight stick, this is PowerA's Fusion Wired Fightpad. The design is inspired by the Sega Saturn gamepad that they say is revered by fight game enthusiasts. It definitely has that retro vibe with this wide shape and subtle grips on the back. Overall, it feels really good in hand. It has a 6-button arcade-style layout, which is best for fighters, so you can have all your light, medium, heavy punches and kicks in one area instead of splitting it into the shoulder buttons. In use, they're pretty firm with a short travel distance, and so far have been very responsive. Then we have a floating D-pad, which is really fluid and precise. Aside from that, it also has a few other features such as a removable cable, 3 swappable magnetic faceplates, a 3.5mm audio jack at the bottom, and on-the-fly customizable toggle switches for the D-pad and right shoulder button. So if you want an easy way to enhance fighting and retro games, definitely give it a try.
It's crazy to think just how much money I've spent doing this. I don't even know if it was worth it. I don't know.
This next one is Ipega's Tomahawk Gamepad. They make a ton of similar looking Android gamepads, so this is their first Nintendo Switch version. It connects via USB-C, and same as the Split Pad Pro, it makes the Switch look huge, but those large grips make it much more ergonomic than the Joy-Cons. In hand, it feels pretty good, but not as premium as it looks due to this hollow plastic they went with. The layout is also a bit different with the analog sticks at the top, face buttons on the bottom right, and all your other buttons on the lower half. As for how they work, it's a love-hate relationship because they are responsive, but some of them, like the trigger, shoulder, start, and select buttons, feel very cheap. The face buttons are fine, but the analog sticks are a little looser than I'd like, and they have noticeable dead zones that you can really feel when you're aiming and trying to be very accurate. That alone will be a deal breaker for a majority of you. As for the D-pad, we've also had issues there with the occasional missed or incorrect inputs, especially when traveling from one end of it to the other. Also, I wish these edges were rounded down a little bit more. Finally, same as the Split Pad Pro, it also lacks NFC for Amiibo, the IR camera, HD rumble, and motion controls, but also there's no USB-C pass-through, so you can't charge the Switch with it attached.
Since the last episode, 8BitDo has released 2 new gamepads for the Switch, so let's check those out. First up, if you hate Joy-Con drift, well, you're gonna love 8BitDo's Lite Gamepad. It's a portable pocket-sized controller with not 1, but 2 D-pads. But before we talk about those, things you should know. It's wireless with an 18-hour battery life, charges via USB-C, you've got 2 modes, either for the Switch or X input, so yes, it's multi-platform compatible. Then we have a turbo mode, but sadly not for the Switch, it's only for X input. Now the shape is similar to the Switch, but as someone with big hands, it's not the most ergonomic. This leads to moments where my grip would cause me to accidentally hit L and R due to their elongated shape, and the left D-pad was difficult to use precisely unless I moved my fingers behind the gamepad. Next, the layout is almost identical to the Switch with the same amount of buttons, including L3 and R3 on the D-pad, but pressing them in can cause accidental inputs. Then, instead of triggers, R2 and L2 are in line with L and R, and every single button, including the D-pads, are clicky, similar to the face buttons on the Joy-Cons, so you can feel every single actuation. Alright, on to the D-pads. On the Switch, these emulate analog sticks, but they only have 8 points of input, no pivot, and they're digital. So unlike an analog stick, they're not the best for games that require precise incremental movements for something like aiming or camera controls. So it's a unique experience with those games, but it's not meant for them. Instead, it's better for 2D fighting games, beat-em-ups, platformers, puzzle games, etc. As for the extra D-pad, the idea seems very niche, and I don't think most people will make use of it, but at this price point, it makes for an awesome little retro pad to take on the go. For those looking for the most portable retro controller out there, look no further than 8BitDo's Zero 2. This latest version of the gamepad improves on a handful of things while keeping that adorable miniature form factor. It's available in 3 colors to match the Switch Lite, but it's also multi-platform compatible. Things you should know: it's a little under 2.5 inches and weighs in at just 20 grams. It's wireless, it has an indicator LED at the bottom, an 8-hour battery which charges via micro USB, sadly not USB-C, and it also comes with a silicone wrist lanyard, but you can do as we did and instead attach a keychain so you can hang it on your bag or keys. Now the D-pad and face buttons are mushy, while the L, R, select, and start buttons are clicky. Overall, they work well, no complaints there, but due to its small size, it's not the most ergonomic controller out there, which makes using the shoulder buttons a bit difficult with that grip. But on the other hand, that size makes it perfect to just leave it in your carrying case so it's ready whenever you need it. Now, when using it with the Switch, keep in mind that it doesn't have ZL, ZR, capture, or home buttons, and obviously no analog sticks, so it's not compatible with games that require those. Instead, this tiny gamepad is best for retro games such as 2D platformers, beat-em-ups, fighters, and they specifically targeted Nintendo's NES and SNES game library by including a button combination for ZL and ZR by pressing in both select and start so you can access that suspend menu. In the end, this makes for an awesome little retro game companion, especially for those who don't want to buy extra Joy-Cons. So first impressions, not only does this controller look awesome, but in hand it feels great, and that's mostly due to the micro-linear texture on the faceplate, and the handles also have this type of crosshatch texture that helps keep your grip. That alone shows they're really paying attention to the details. Also, it makes this very cool sound when you scratch it with your nails. Some would call it annoying. Next thing that stands out is the analog sticks. Very smooth motion, but they have a rubber ring with lines throughout the edge that's very extruded, and that creates this indentation with more of that crosshatched pattern down the middle. This makes it so they're very easy to manipulate and use, which increases your accuracy. The face buttons are pretty standard fare in both design and actuation, but I do like that they added some curvature to the ZL and ZR triggers. Now the D-pad is smooth throughout, including the slightly rounded corners, and it has a bit of a centered indent, which helps when moving around and pulling off combos in fighting games. Personally, I found that it's very solid and much better than that of the Pro controllers. Over on the back, we have 2 paddle-style buttons on each handle, which you can program, and we actually unbinded them because during intense use, we kept pressing them by accident since you tend to grip those handles, so you want to try and sort of hover over them instead. Overall, I think they nailed it when it comes to design and layout, and it's also very well made and thought out. But now, let's talk details. So it is a wired USB controller, but it has a generously long 10-foot cable. You can use it in either TV mode by connecting it to the dock, or in handheld and tabletop mode by connecting it directly to the Switch with one of those USB to USB-C adapters. Once the home button is illuminated, you're good to go. Now, although we do prefer wireless, a wired controller does have its benefits, such as never having to worry about charging it or swapping out the batteries, or losing connection, and for those who would notice, input lag. You just plug it in and you're good to go. Another feature of this controller is the swappable faceplates, hence the name Faceoff. They pop right off, and inserting them is just as easy. Now, eventually they will be releasing individual faceplates, but for now, they are swappable with the faceplates included with other Faceoff controllers. Back to those buttons, as I said, they are programmable, and to set that up, you hold down the function button, press the button you want to map, and the LED will start to flash. Then you just press the button you want to assign to it, and if you did it right, the LED will flash 3 times. Remapping buttons is a very simple feature, and we use it mostly to remap the button press of analog sticks, which is sometimes used for dashing or crouching, which I always struggle to use, especially when I'm trying to aim. So the biggest feature is headset support. To use voice chat, you need a wired headset. We're using PDP's Xbox Level 50s, but just about any will work as long as it has a 3.5mm jack, which connects right at the bottom of the controller. Once you do, you should hear audio through the headset, which means it's working. Duh. In use, it works really well, but that also depends on the quality of the microphone on your headset. Now, it also has integrated volume controls, which you can access by simply holding down this function button and then pressing up or down on the Dpad to either increase or decrease the volume. And you can also mute the microphone by double tapping the function button, and doing it again unmutes it. That aside, even if you don't use or need a microphone, you can just use it for audio with normal headphones. We've checked out PDP's line of Deluxe controllers before, but this latest one adds 2 highly requested features, which makes it a new favorite. This is the Afterglow Wireless Deluxe controller. Same as the other versions, we still have great build quality and an ergonomic design, large and springy face buttons, some of the best analog grips out there, a solid, easy to use and responsive D-pad, curvy, accessible shoulder buttons, the ability to wake up the Switch with either plus or home buttons, along with paddle buttons on the back that you can program, that awesome customizable RGB lighting with 4 modes, our favorite being this one which reacts to the movement of the analog sticks. And this time around, it still doesn't have rumble, but they did listen and make it wireless with a long-lasting rechargeable battery, and more importantly, they gave us motion controls. So it's not just all looks, because there's definitely some substance here along with those new additions, which make it a new favorite that we can safely recommend. Aside from a grip, one of the best ways to get a traditional controller experience out of the Switch in handheld mode is with HORI's Split Pad Pro, which is now available in new colors and designs. There's red, blue, translucent black, 2 Pokemon versions, and this awesome Pac-Man version. The printing on here is top notch and the colors are very vibrant. Love the yellow analog sticks and blue D-pad. I'm not even a massive Pac-Man guy, but I really dig this design. Gulikit, who makes some of our favorite Switch batteries, is back with their own controllers. I normally rush through this, but the unboxing experience for both is actually pretty noteworthy, and each comes with these durable info cards, flat USB-C charging cables, and their own custom protective cases. So let's check out their design and layouts, and then we'll talk about the features that both of them share. First up is their Elves controller that caters towards the Switch Lite, hence the matching colors, along with this unique boomerang-looking design similar to the Sega Genesis controller. In hand, it feels very solid and lightweight. I like the extended sides and these low grips for your fingers. On here, we've got flat, responsive face buttons, thin shoulder buttons, and flat triggers that actuate off the sides, a wiggly D-pad, and 2 Switch-style analog sticks with barely any travel distance, making them very sensitive, but don't worry, that can be adjusted. Now, their KingKong Pro controller looks and feels just about identical to an Xbox controller. There's no hiding that, but on here we have glossy flat face buttons, a pretty basic D-pad, slightly loose analog sticks. They're nicely textured and made with metal underneath, same as the ring surrounding it, and that also applies to the large shoulder and trigger buttons. On top of that, in here it also has NFC for Amiibo, which is pretty rare in a third-party controller. Now, as for features, these share a lot in common. Both are multi-platform compatible with a dedicated button. They're wireless and charge via USB-C. We've got 14 hours of battery life for the Elves controller and about 18 for the KingKong. They have motion controls and rumble, and you can adjust their sensitivity along with the analog sticks as well. Now, they have 2 standout features. First is an advanced turbo mode that you can assign to any button and then hold it down to rapid fire, but you can also turn it into an auto turbo button that you can press once and it'll fire for 10 seconds or until you press it again. And finally is their APG autopilot gaming button, which is pretty much macro recording. You can record any series of inputs for up to 10 seconds, including delays, and it'll then play it back exactly as recorded. Together, these are big features that you can get very creative with for repetitive tasks or detailed input combination. And that is what makes these controllers stand out among the rest and definitely worth considering. Although it looks similar to the others, this is PDP's latest Faceoff Wireless Deluxe controller. Same as before, we have large face buttons, a combo-friendly smooth and concave D-pad, some of the best grippy analog sticks out there, curvy triggers, 2 paddle-style buttons that you can program, and this top shell is swappable with any of the others in this line. In here, we also have interchangeable D-pad and analog sticks. They pop right off and you can swap them out with the included longer precision stick to increase your accuracy. Now this time around, it has motion controls and it's also wireless with a long 40-hour battery life, but it still charges via micro USB. I'm guessing that's so it can use the same cables as the others in this line. Either way, those 2 new additions make it a solid choice that can even go head-to-head with the Pro controller. Although not specifically released for the OLED, it's got a white shell and I like it. This is PowerA's Fusion Pro controller. It comes in this protective Fusion branded travel case that sadly has no handle or strap, but it's fancy and really well made. And here it is. Like any controller, the first few seconds in hand tell you everything, and this one has a lot to say. The shape is about the same as their enhanced controllers, but it's upgraded in just about every way. It's not as curvaceous as I'd like, but it does fit well in hand. These new injected rubber grips feel incredible. It's like a very grippy soft gel, and it comes with 2 faceplates. The white one with orange accents has a normal plastic feel, but the black one has this fancy soft touch texture that I can't stop caressing. While we're here, these are super simple to remove with the dent on the front. They just pop off, and as you can see, they're attached by these magnets, which also make it very easy to snap into place. Now, faceplates aside, the reason you want quick access under the hood is for these swappable Elves analog sticks. The kit includes 2 normal ones with a very nice textured ring to keep your grip. Then, with the same grip, we have a longer one to enhance your precision with things like aiming or steering. And the 4th is this smooth concave one, which is a bit too slippery for my liking. I would have preferred another longer stick instead, or better yet, why not just give us 2 of each? In use, the Alp switches have worked well. Thanks to these anti-friction rings, they work very smoothly, they're accurate, they reset quickly enough, and so far we've had no signs of drift. So let's talk about the rest. I like the D-pad. It has a nice pivot. It's worked very accurately. Can't recall any false inputs, but for intense games, I would have loved if the edges and corners were a bit rounded out to make it easier to travel around. L and R feel good. They work well throughout the entire button. And the triggers are a bit smaller than I'd like, with a low travel distance that for a digital Switch works fine. Now the face buttons are normally sized at a good height, maybe a bit too close together, and require a bit more pressure than I'm used to, but I like them even though they're also a bit loose. So we're not done, because on the back we have their mappable Pro Pack with 4 metal paddles, 2 small and 2 large, which you can map on the fly to any other button on this controller, except the plus, minus, home, and capture buttons. Love this feature, it's extremely quick and easy to use. With my large hands, they comfortably land on my middle and ring fingers, and although they sit a bit low, they feel good in use, very springy. I normally map these with communication, taunts, or the face buttons that make it so you don't have to move your thumb off the stick, but nothing too vital because their short travel distance makes them easy to accidentally press. One way around that, since they're magnetically attached, you can just remove the ones you don't want, or with a push of a button, you can detach the whole thing, which connects via these pins, and swap it out with the included cap. Another thing that comes in this kit is a 10-foot braided USB-A to USB-C cable to either charge the controller's 900 milliamp battery, which, by the way, gives you about 20 hours of playtime, or use it in wired and you can change between them with the switch on the back. Now this is where things get a bit complicated because there's 2 features exclusive to each mode. In wireless, you have rock-solid motion controls, but they don't work in wired mode. Then at the bottom here, we have an audio jack for a headset, very nice, but it only works in wired and not in wireless. I know this is due to console limitations, but if you're in a situation when you want to use comms and motion controls, you'll have to choose one over the other with this controller. Regardless of the reason, it's just an odd compromise. A few other miscellaneous things, like all of their controllers, it can wake up the Switch, which is a very neat feature to have, but oddly cannot be remapped in the settings. And it does work for PC, but it may not be recognized, so you have to use it through Steam. So overall, it has the essentials along with a few extras, but does leave a few things behind. Like all their other Switch controllers, it doesn't have rumble, which these days is sort of a default. There's also no NFC for Amiibo, and no extras like turbo or macro functionality. I wouldn't call any of those features necessities, but as a premium controller, I expect it to go above and beyond to spoil us a bit, but instead, it now positions itself head-to-head with other, more affordable options that do have these features. At the end of the day, the Fusion Pro Wireless is so close to being one of the best Switch controllers we've tested, but compared to other options in this space, it leaves me wanting more. A while back, we checked out Gulikit's well-made and feature-packed KingKong Pro controller, but now they're back with the KingKong 2 Pro, and although it looks similar, it's got some big upgrades on the inside. The design, layout, and buttons are identical to the first, but let's talk about what's new. This time around, we've got a long 25-hour battery life. The plastic feels much better in hand, and we now have textured grips on the back. The face buttons are the same low-profile design, but sit on their custom switches that are very durable with an insane lifespan. They work well, reset quickly, but do feel slightly sticky. We now have clicky L and R buttons that actuate nicely all throughout. Then we have buttery smooth analog sticks that manages what Nintendo don't, that being their anti-drift. That's because instead of parts that grind and wear down with time, these utilize a magnetic contactless sensor which avoids the wear and tear altogether, and there's really no compromise. Over a month in use and it's worked very precisely, we haven't experienced any jumps or missed inputs, and it feels just as it did on day one. Aside from that new tech, same as the original, it's packed with more features than any other third-party controller out there. I'll list them on the screen, but some of the highlights: we have highly accurate motion controls, along with their adjustable motion sense aim assist with 3 levels of sensitivity activated by either the L or ZL buttons, but because they emulate the right stick, it's also compatible with games that don't support motion controls. Their macro recording is one of the best out there that can record up to a staggering 10 minutes of accurate gameplay, which is perfect for repetitive tasks. And it also has turbo with 2 modes. One that activates when you hold down the designated button, or 2, which just repeats the button input until you stop it. There's so much more to it. It's honestly one of the most capable third-party controllers for the Switch. They're very proud of what they made here, and rightly so. There's a lot of thought put into just about every feature here, all of which work incredibly well. If you love fighting and arcade games as much as we do, it's about time you upgrade to a fight stick. If you're looking for a place to start, check out this Fusion Arcade Stick by PowerA. It's portable, but with full-size stick and buttons, decent weight, the build quality is top-notch, mostly plastic, but with a chunky metal base, and it stays in place with 4 rubber feet. On the front, behind these 6 screws, we have a removable faceplate with a red insert that you can swap out for the included black Fusion design, or add your own custom artwork using their downloadable template. Pop in 2 AA's and hit the power switch for a wireless 30-hour connection that so far we've experienced little to no noticeable input lag with. But if you don't want to risk it, behind this compartment we have a long 10-foot USB-C to USB-A cable to use it wired, and the best part? It's not permanently attached, so if it stops working, you can just swap it out for another instead of replacing the entire unit. On the top left here, we have plus, minus, capture, and home buttons, a player notification LED, and a stick switch to toggle between Dpad and left or right stick. Sadly, there's no additional features like turbo or button mapping. In use, the actuation on the buttons is clicky like a Cherry MX keyboard switch. They're also stiff, which can wear you out after a few hours, but so far, every input's registered just fine. The ball top stick is on an octagon gate, and like the buttons, you can feel every direction, no issues there. Then, if you're looking to customize the parts, it's easy enough to get into, there's also labels for the buttons, and nothing is soldered, so you don't have a problem there. So if you're looking for a fight stick and don't know where to start, this is definitely a solid, versatile option to begin with. We're big fans of HORI Split Pad Pro, which, for those who don't know, is made up of 2 gamepads that give handheld mode a full-size controller upgrade. Now, when HORI announced the new Split Pad Pro Compact, I was hoping they would include the previous missing features, but sadly, that's not the case. It costs the same as the original and also functions just about the same, but this time around, it's got a thinner form factor that feels good in hand, although I wish it was a bit wider in the palm. And it's available in fancy dancy colors with new designs coming soon. Quick look around, we've got smaller and grippier thumbsticks, the same decent rounded D-pad, smaller face buttons, the shoulders and triggers are shrunk down, the back buttons are now low profile and clicky, and instead of soft rubber, all the other buttons are now a rigid plastic. It also has the same features as before, that being the textured grips, remappable back buttons and turbo function per pad, the stand on the back to protect the triggers when laying flat, and it's also dock compatible. But same as before, they're not powered, so they only work when attached in handheld mode. There's no rumble, and more importantly, no motion controls, so bye-bye Splatoon 3. Overall, they look great. They're smaller than the original, yet bigger and more ergonomic than the Joy-Cons, but their exclusivity to handheld mode and the lack of motion controls in this latest version just feels like a missed opportunity. If they could fix that, I think we'd have the true Joy-Con alternatives we've all been waiting for. This next one we recently featured and had this to say about. If you're looking to take a full-featured controller along with the Switch on the go, but don't have a lot of room, check out the tiny but mighty Lite 2 by 8-Bit Dough. For those new to it, it pretty much takes all the core parts of a controller and crams them in this thin rectangular pad. First, the basics. It's available in turquoise and this pink. The build quality is top-notch all around. Clearly, it's not the most ergonomic design, but it's also not that uncomfortable. It's wireless with an 18-hour battery that charges via USB-C, and like most other controllers, it's compatible with PC and Android via this switch on the front. So to keep to this size, just about everything on here is obviously smaller than the average controller. Up top, we have very thin clicky shoulder buttons. Then we have slightly larger digital triggers to rest your fingers on. Over on the front, the face buttons are tiny and close together. Wish they spaced them out a bit more, but they work just fine. Then we have flat, minus, plus, capture, and home buttons, which helps avoid accidental inputs. The D-pad is tiny with a nice curve. It's a bit loose and mushy. No miss inputs on our end though, but it is a bit more difficult to use at this size. Finally, this time around, we now have 2 Joy-Con sized analog sticks that work well, but the movement does feel a bit more restricted than we're used to. Now in here, we actually have a tiny rumble motor that you can feel at the center of the gamepad. It's not that strong, but it's trying its best and it's very cute. Finally, they even managed to cram motion controls in here, which works really well, and that makes it compatible with a ton of additional games. So although I do wish some of the buttons use the space a little better, overall it's a quirky, ultra-portable gamepad that makes some compromises, but doesn't sacrifice the core features you need for most games. That's why it's the best in its class, portable class.
This is 8-Bit Dough's Lite SE, which is geared towards gamers with limited mobility. Similar to their Lite 2, it shares the same shape and build quality, along with features such as its multi-platform compatibility, the same 20-hour battery life, rumble and motion controls, along with a few accessibility-friendly changes. The most noticeable is its new button layout, which converts the D-pad, shoulder, trigger, and thumbsticks into these dedicated buttons. Next, the thumbsticks and face buttons are more sensitive, which requires less force to use. And finally, we have a rubber pad underneath to help keep it in place. In use, the layout takes some getting used to, but the increased sensitivity makes everything feel snappy and responsive. Now, because I'm not the target demographic, I can't provide much input on how useful those accessibility features are, but I did find it surprising that it's not compatible with their ultimate software, because it could have really benefited from button remapping and macros. So, if those features sound like something that can enhance and make gaming more accessible to you, then it's definitely worth checking out. A while ago, Nintendo re-released their iconic Super Nintendo controller as a companion to their Switch Online SNES app. This is the Western release in purple and gray, looks identical to the original, build quality is top-notch, and I still love how it sits in hand. All the inputs work very well, especially the best-in-class D-pad, but now it's wireless with a 20-hour battery that charges via USB-C. We have ZL and ZR buttons up top, and surprisingly, no capture or home buttons, so have another controller nearby to access those. When connected, in the Super Nintendo app, we now have Super Mario World sound effects and this updated SNES theme. Finally, in here, we have shortcuts to access the suspend menu and, oddly enough, home and capture, but they only work within the app. So yes, there are better controllers out there, but this one's clearly geared towards nostalgic collectors. Nonetheless, it's still a solid, no-thrills gamepad, perfect for RPGs, side-scrollers, and fighting games. This is the reimagined GameCube controller for the Nintendo Switch by Retro Fighters. It comes in two variations, the BattlerGC and the BladeGC, where the only difference is the Dpad location, and they're available in purple, orange, and black. The ergonomics are more akin to 8BitDo's Pro controller than the GameCube's, but it's well constructed and lightweight despite feeling a bit plasticky. It's multi-platform compatible and wireless, not with Bluetooth, but by these two dongles. There's USB for the Switch and PC, and we have one for the GameCube and Wii. It has a 10-hour battery, rumble, a turbo function, and analog triggers that act digital on the Switch since they're not supported. On here, we've got grippy thumbsticks with the OG octagonal gate, a small D-pad, mushy face buttons that work well, and up top, we've got clicky shoulder buttons and curvy triggers with a medium travel distance. So it doesn't look identical to the OG, but it works great, it's well constructed, and I appreciate its versatility. However, it's ultimately a better controller for the GameCube than for the Switch.
8BitDo has retrofied their already retro SN30 Pro, now in this awesome transparent crystal purple and jade green. Quick recap, it's an SNES-inspired gamepad that keeps that classic layout with one of our favorite D-pads, responsive face buttons, rubbery select and start buttons, rounded shoulder buttons, along with a few modern upgrades such as elongated curved triggers, symmetrical analog sticks, and home and screenshot buttons. Like most 8BitDo controllers, it's multi-platform compatible, it's wireless with a 16-hour battery that charges via USB-C, but it can also be used wired. It also has motion controls, rumble that you can actually see through the shell, and a turbo function for all platforms except the Switch, since that button is used for capture. Bummer. And because you're all wondering, no, it sadly does not wake the Switch. So if you're on the hunt for a portable gamepad that looks amazing, tackles the essentials well, and works great for both retro and modern games, look no further than the SN30 Pro. Another year and another successful Genki Kickstarter. As I'm recording this, with over 4,000 backers, they've raised almost $700,000, so they must be doing something right over there. This year's campaign features their latest line of 4 new products, one of which is the Pocket Pro Gamepad, a collaboration between Genki and 8BitDo, and the team was awesome enough to send it our way so I can share it with all of you. So first thing, it's not a new controller. It's pretty much a collaborative, limited Genki edition version of 8BitDo's SN30 Pro. We featured it before, but for those new to it, it's an SNES-inspired gamepad that keeps the classic layout but throws in a few modern upgrades. As expected with 8BitDo, it's multi-platform compatible with 3 modes that you can swap between. It's wireless with a 480 mAh battery that can last around 18 hours and it charges via USB-C, but it can also be used wired for a lag-free experience. So right off the bat, I absolutely love this design. It has this clear shell with a matte coating. It's foggy, which sort of gives it this kind of blurred out effect, so you can still see the board inside, but it's opaque or solid enough, which allows the inputs and graphics to stand out. The face buttons are in Genki's new logo colors, purple, blue, green, and red, but in these softer pastel tones, which gives off this kind of 80s tech computery vibe. The screenshot and home buttons are transparent. Then we have these, let's call them schematic style graphics throughout. They're very minimal and clean with labels for features such as gyro, Hall effect, rumble. And up top, we have these useful shortcuts to swap between platforms.
Hey,
but
you
this
still here?
version doesn't
Come
have
on,
labels
almost done.
on the face buttons, most likely because they're different for each platform, so it's just easier to avoid confusion this way. And as I expect from 8BitDo, build quality is stellar. It's made of high-quality plastics with a lot of attention to detail. It's well put together, and it feels incredible in hand. On here, we have that OG D-pad. It's just the right size with a slight curve to it. It's sturdy with a slight texture that helps you pull off all those moves. We then have snappy and responsive face buttons with magnetic button sensors. They're widely spaced out, which should help prevent accidental inputs. But same as the original, they are a tad bit close to that right analog stick. Down the middle, we have the classic rubbery select and start buttons. thin, rounded shoulder buttons, but unlike the original it's based on, we have these very curvy triggers with a short travel distance. Now that should give you a clue that sadly, no, they're not analog, they're digital. I love me some analog inputs, but that's a sacrifice they most likely made to keep to this portable size. Next, we have our home and screenshot buttons. And finally, we have the full-size symmetrical analog sticks. They're buttery smooth with just the right amount of resistance, same for clicking them in, and yes, they're Hall effect joysticks, which means you won't have to worry about drift. Now, as for additional features, the list is a bit short. We've got standard rumble, motion controls, and it does have an on-the-fly turbo function, but it doesn't work for the Switch since that button is used for screenshot. Overall, it's a portable gamepad with a retro design aesthetic that I love. It tackles the essentials well, and it's versatile enough for both retro and modern games on multiple platforms. This one feels like it's for collectors out there, which makes it a must-have for me. I absolutely love this design. This is RetroFlag's handheld controller for both the original and OLED version of the Switch. It has a GameCube-inspired design with things like a C-stick and colorized buttons in this retro transparent purple shell, and build quality is fantastic. On the left, we have a large analog stick and D-pad, both which work well. To the right, big face buttons and that analog stick nub. Up top, we have thick shoulder buttons and slightly curved triggers, and all our other miscellaneous buttons too. As for features, it has rumble, motion controls, it's using Gulikit's Hall effect joysticks to prevent drift. It has a turbo mode with auto fire, and it also has a button swap function, but you're better off using the console's remapping feature. The middle is softly lined and the console glides right in with a secure fit. It connects via USB-C and has a pass-through port so you can still charge it, but no, it's not dock compatible. In hand, thanks to those curvy ergonomic grips, it feels amazing, and the button layout is just right, which makes it a blast to use. To keep it simple, it's one of the best handheld upgrades we've tested. These are PDP's Realms line of controllers that have these multi-layered designs with a floating figure on the inside, which gives us this really cool parallax effect. They're available in wired and wireless versions with a few differences between each. Build quality is top-notch. They're lightweight, and I like the rounded, compact design. The face and shoulder buttons work well, same for the triangular triggers. We've got a sturdy and accurate D-pad, as well as a solid pair of grippy analog sticks with just the right amount of resistance. Now sadly, they don't have rumble, motion controls, nor NFC for amiibos, but let's be honest, we're here for the designs. They've got 3 for Sonic, there's one for Pikmin, my personal favorite, then there's another for Transformers, and they even have a Sonic headset, which looks awesome. On top of that, they have adjustable LEDs with multiple lighting modes, which really make these pop. I absolutely love these, so if you want all the details, check out our full review. The Nitro Deck is a handheld controller for both the original and OLED Switch that gives you better ergonomics and controls along with some extra features. It's available in many versions, including these sold-out limited editions, and you can get them by themselves or in a few bundles. I'd recommend one with a carrying case. It's got a bubbly ergonomic design that's really well made, it feels great in hand, and it doesn't interfere with anything on the console. The face buttons work well, same for the curvy D-pad. I also like the clicky shoulder buttons, but I wish the triggers didn't have so much travel. Now the analog sticks are Hall effect, so they shouldn't drift. They're larger and swappable, but they have a noticeable dead zone, and it's sadly in a very cramped position. Then it has a few extra features, such as programmable back buttons, basic turbo and macro functions, a friction hinge, and more, which you can check out in our full review. Also, before you pull the trigger, just know that an upgraded Plus version is releasing soon. This is Nixie's Hyperion Pro Gamepad. Like the Joy-Cons, you can use them with a connector as a traditional controller, individually, or attached in handheld mode. It's available in a few colors, including this GameCube-inspired one, and they're wireless with a 6-hour battery that charges through either the rails or their USB-C ports. In hand, they're super comfortable thanks to their large and curvy shape with textured grips. It's lightweight and well put together, although it does feel plasticky. But the inputs are great. They're full size, nicely laid out, and they all work well. We've got snappy buttons, great tension on the sticks, triggers with minimal travel, the D-pad is clicky and accurate, and we have additional features such as drift-free Hall effect joysticks, adjustable rumble, turbo mode with auto fire, programmable back buttons with a macro function, adjustable RGB lighting, And yes, it can also wake the Switch. Previously, we featured HORI Split Pad Pros and compacts, but if you want to use them like a traditional controller, check out their attachment adapter. You can get it by itself or as a set for both versions in a few colors. This being one of the Split Pad Compact with Pokemon Eevee evolutions in a navy and clear shell that looks awesome. Really nice print work here too. The controllers are the same as when we last checked them out, but to keep it short, they're really well constructed. They're slightly wider than Joy-Cons, so they can move the inputs higher up, which makes them more comfortable to use, and all the buttons and sticks work really well. The adapter is wired with a long, almost 10-foot USB-A cable that connects to the dock. On the back, we have this big ol' hump for the audio jack underneath that you can use with wired headphones or a headset. Then in the middle, we have audio controls to adjust the volume and mute it. Not much else to it, but now you can use your split pads as a wired controller. I only wish it was wireless, because that'd be awesome. This is the NEO S by Cracked, and it's pretty much a Nitro Deck as a controller. Right off the bat, their box game is top notch. I went with their limited Pop Art Junkyard Edition, and I also went with their clear version, but they launched alongside a few others, which all look great. They're identical aside from the design, and it seems that the analog stick tops on the limited edition one are exclusive to it. These tops aren't even available in their additional set. Over on the back, we have all its main features, but it leaves out a few things like turbo mode and macro recording. Up top, we have a fancy-dancy loop, which you know costs the money to go with. The slipcover slides right off, and inside we have the controller, which I'll get back to. We have a card on how to connect it to your platform because yes, it's multi-platform, works for the Switch, PC, and iOS. Then we have the quick start guide that includes a QR code so you can access the full manual, which you'll want for all those juicy details. Then we have a fancy USB-C to USB-A charging cable, and the controller is in this really nice velvety pull string pouch so you can keep it safe when you take it on the go. They really spared no expense on the packaging. I feel so loved and cared for. Here's the NEO S. So first thing, build quality is top tier. Everything on here just feels high quality. It's got a good weight to it, which I like. It's in this rectangular shape, similar to that of 8BitDo's Lite Gamepads, and that works well to showcase the artwork, but it's clearly not the most ergonomic. To help with that, we have these textured grips, but they're a bit small and not as curvy as I'd like. They don't even compete with traditional grips. Either way, that does help make them a bit more comfortable to hold, and they make it easier to reach those back buttons. Like I said, this is the Pop Art Junkyard Edition in this kind of turquoise color with a design that looks like something out of Hi-Fi Rush. Then we have their classic clear edition with the retro transparent shell that looks awesome and gives you a peek at all the inner workings. Most of the buttons are identical to that of the Nitro Deck except for the shoulder buttons and triggers, which are slightly different, and the cracked/home button, which is about twice as large. While we're here, it's got that indicator LED to help with all those features, and yes, you can adjust its brightness or just turn it off. The face buttons are just the right size, they're glossy with a very nice actuation and the perfect amount of resistance. The buttons in the middle work just fine. They're a bit far from your thumbs, but this can help you avoid accidentally hitting them. The Dpad has become one of my favorites. It's got a very deep curve with a smooth texture that together make it easy for your thumb to travel around. Perfect to pull off those tough combos in fighting games. The shoulder buttons are very wide and work well all throughout, but they do feel a bit loose. Then we have glossy, smooth, and curved analog triggers with Hall effect technology, and they have a medium travel distance with good resistance. Now, I wasn't a big fan of them on the Nitro Deck because the distance is unnecessary on the Switch since it doesn't support analog triggers, but they make sense here since the NEO S is a multi-platform gamepad. So although you can't make use of them on the Switch, you can on Android. Next up, the analog sticks are full size, just the right height, they're buttery smooth, yes, they're swappable for their other stick tops, and they're still Hall effect joysticks, so you won't have to worry about them drifting. In my testing, they worked well, very precise, and with their no dead zone mode, they activate even faster. But as you can see here, you'll notice some delay, so did a few others, and they reduced it with their latest firmware. Now it's just about the same as with the official Pro controller. Over on the back, we have our program button in the center, reset to the right of it, and two remappable buttons for each grip. They're thin with little to no travel, and they work well. Now let's talk features. It's wireless via Bluetooth 5.0 and it has a 750 milliamp battery. You can charge it via USB-C or with the charging pins underneath with their upcoming charging stand. Down here, we also have a 3.5mm audio jack that you can use with headphones or a headset, but keep in mind that on the Switch, it only works when the controller is wired to the console. The gyro in here works really well. Motion controls are top notch. I'm sure it's similar to what's on the official Switch and Joy-Cons, but it feels very accurate. Same as the Nitro Deck, we have basic turbo. You can assign turbo on the fly to any button and it works well.
Wake up,
But as I said before, I love if they expanded on it with an auto fire mode so I don't have to hold down that button. And you can also record basic macros to then map to one of the back buttons, but just know that they can't record delays, it just triggers instantly. The rumble motors in here are good, they're not HD like the Joy-Cons, but the feedback is solid yet subtle. At their highest level, you can definitely feel it, but it's not as exaggerated, which thankfully means they're not that loud. And yes, you'll be glad to know it can wake the Switch. Back here, we have the RFID touchpoint that you can scan to their app so you can add it to your account via their True Collection system. Remember, it's not an NFT, it just sort of feels like one. I already talked about it with the Nitro Deck, but this time around, they've made it much more useful with the addition of their control feature, which lets you adjust and customize the controller in the app. Once you connect it, we have this first screen with the collection info, all the features we can tweak, and you can even update the firmware right here. Next, we have buttons where you can tap any and reassign it to whatever other by just pressing it on the gamepad. Then we have triggers where you can adjust their sensitivity from low, medium, and high, followed by sticks where you can see how they function, reset, etc. You can also toggle no dead zone mode, which actually works really well. And finally, we have rumble where you can adjust each motor either individually or combined to low, medium, and high. Love this addition, it's easy to set up and it makes the app really useful. I think the only thing missing would be a macro recording feature that we can tinker with because that would easily elevate this to the next level. If you like HORI Split Pad compacts but wish they were wireless, check out Omelette Gaming's Joypads. We featured them recently, they're sold individually in a few colors so you can mix and match. They come with thick wrist straps, and like Joy-Cons, they're compatible with each mode for the Switch. Build quality is plasticky, but they have a wide ergonomic shape which makes them comfortable in hand. Like I said, they are wireless with a 5 to 6 hour battery that charges like the Joy-Cons through the rails or with these USB-C ports. On them, we have all the same inputs. The face buttons work well, but they're not as springy as I'd like. The triggers are buttons with little to no travel distance. We have a traditional Dpad instead of buttons, which works fine, but they're awkward to use individually. And the grippy analog sticks are HOLED joysticks, so you don't have to worry about drift. Aside from that, they also have basic rumble along with motion controls, but sadly no turbo or macro recording, although they do glow in the dark, so you can easily find them when the power goes out. One Switch controller that's been on my radar for years now is the Horipad, which is crazy because it's probably one of the most popular. It's available in more designs than I can count. There's officially licensed ones like these, but they also have plain colored ones. It's full size but lightweight. It's well constructed and it's got a comfortable ergonomic shape, but the plastic is really smooth, so not as easy to grip, although this blue one does have a bit of a texture on this piece here. The shoulder, face buttons, and D-pad are all good. The triggers are great with a curvy shape and minimal travel distance, and the analog sticks work well, but they are a bit loose and could use more resistance. As for features, it's wireless with a 15-hour battery, it's got motion controls, it can wake the Switch, and that's it. Sadly, there's no rumble or any other fun features like that. So if you just need a controller without all the fancy stuff, the Horipad gets the job done. It plays it safe, but it's reliable, and sometimes that's all you need. HORI is back with the latest version of their popular controller. This is the Horipad Plus. It's a very lightweight wired gamepad with a long 10-foot cable and a few additional features. Same as the original, it's pretty well made and feels good in hand. It's got those smoothly textured curvy grips. The analog sticks are coated in a smooth rubber that makes them easy to move around and click in. The D-pad works great, same for the face buttons. The shoulder buttons actuate easily throughout. The triggers feel like bouncy paddles that also work well. And we have rubber buttons for plus, minus, home, and capture. Finally, on the back above the grips, we have two buttons that you can use along with a function button to adjust the analog stick sensitivity on the fly, as well as remap to any other on here. Down the center, we have this area that shows you all our LEDs for all those modes. And under there, we have a headphone jack to use with the Switch-compatible headsets, buttons for on-the-fly turbo with adjustable speed, microphone mute with an LED, and our function button. Now, there's no rumble, which is a bummer, but it does have motion controls that instead of a gyro, uses their motion aim, which acts as a right stick, and that makes it so it can work with games that don't support motion controls. With the function button, you can adjust the sensitivity from 1 to 3, and you have a switch on the back to toggle between using the controller in either vertical or horizontal positions. Also, if you don't want it on the entire time, you can use it on the fly by assigning it to one of the paddle buttons to toggle it on for specific moments. So in use, it's not as precise as the Joy-Cons or Pro controller. There's moments when it just seems off, so you'll have to get used to it, but I appreciate the ability to add motion aiming to games that don't support it. Then, if that's all too much, don't worry, you can just turn it off. Overall, it's a solid wired gamepad with a unique take on motion controls and a few other useful features with a steep learning curve, so keep the manual handy. If you're tired of comfortable, full-size controllers, or you just have very small hands, check out the adorable Atom by Cracked. It's a tiny gamepad that you can get in 8 colors, 2 which are transparent. It's wireless with an 8 to 10 hour battery that charges via USB-C, and yes, you can also use it wired. As you can guess, it doesn't have rumble or motion controls, but it is multi-platform compatible, so you can use it with the Switch, your phone, PC, and more. At this size, we have shrunk down versions of all our inputs that work well, but we have no analog sticks, which means it's not compatible with games that require them. The good news? With a shortcut, you can make the Dpad act as either the left or right stick, which should make it compatible with more games. So in use, it's clearly not the most ergonomic, but it does work, and it's best for casual 2D games or those that don't need dual analog sticks. There's much more to it, so for all the details, check out our full review. This is Nixie's Wizard Joypad for the Switch. It's a very wide GameCube-inspired controller that you can use as a gamepad or attached to the Switch in handheld mode. Build quality is good, but it has that hollow, plasticky feel. They're wireless with an 8.5 hour battery that charges via USB-C. They have sensitive motion controls, adjustable rumble, illuminated buttons that you can toggle off, and it can also wake the Switch. Now, each joypad has their own turbo function with auto fire, remappable back buttons that you can use with their macro function, and each has a set of LED indicators. As for inputs, we have drift-free Hall effect thumbsticks, and it comes with 2 sets of swappable octagonal and round gates. Next, a clicky button-style D-pad that's not the best, squishy face buttons in that GameCube layout, and tactile shoulder buttons and curvy triggers. Overall, it's an awesome take on a modern Wavebird that works great for Smash and just about any other game, and if you want to take it on the go, they also have a custom carrying case for it. These are NYKO's Dualies. They're odd-looking Joy-Con alternatives with pretty bad reviews that years later caused them to drastically reduce the price, which now makes them sort of okay. But first, a big PSA, you need to update the firmware in order to use them. They're available in 3 transparent colors, and I went with this black textured one, which also comes with 2 sets of thumb grips, one low profile and one tall. They charge via USB-C, no rails on here, so they can't be used in handheld mode. They're very plasticky but durable, and they have this odd hourglass shape. In hand, they're awkward, but a good size. I do like this lip on the back for your fingers to rest on, and the layout is comfortable in both orientations. The inputs are just okay. We have recessed chiclet face buttons, thin wraparound shoulder buttons, next to tiny triggers, squishy SL and SR buttons, and the analog sticks are fine, but they have no grippy texture. As for features, they've got a 6-hour battery, but you can't charge them while playing. Very odd. Same as the Joy-Cons, they have motion controls, rumble, on-the-fly basic turbo, and you can use them individually. But no NFC for Amiibo, and no IR reader. I know you guys love your IR reader. Overall, they're nothing special, but they get the job done, and at a discounted price, they're a decent extra pair that is probably worth considering, as long as you can keep them charged. I bought these 3. Each had multiple listings with the same image sold through random generic brands that I'm sure disappear or change all the time, but these were through Amazon Prime, so if anything happens, I can easily get my money back. First up, we have these Splatoon ones in this decent looking packaging. You can see them on this window right here. We've got the features at the bottom.
Back here, Joy-Con pad for NSL along with the button mapping. And inside we have some basic instructions. And here's how they look, but we'll talk design in a bit. Next, in this beautiful white box, we should have the Pokemon ones. The controllers are bubble wrapped and we have the same instructions as the last one, very interesting. And here's our Pokemon Joy-Cons. Finally, we have the Zelda ones, which are in the same packaging as the Splatoon ones. I'm starting to see a pattern here, but it oddly doesn't include the same instructions. Instead, we have what I can only guess is this officially licensed Totoro card for a lifetime warranty. Incredible, lifetime. Well, you know, as long as the company exists or even responds. Let's move on to design. First, the Splatoon ones, they're in purple and green with a really nice gradient. The graphics seem to be laser etched or engraved, not sure what the term is, but they look good. On the back, they're white with these tentacle suction cups, and overall, color me impressed. Next up, we have the Pokemon ones featuring an unlicensed Pikachu with lightning bolts and Pokeballs scattered around in a transparent smoky shell that looks actually pretty awesome. Would have loved these without the graphic on them, but I'll take what I can get. And finally, we have these Tears of the Kingdom ones, which look very dull. The design is just lazy, and it was even scuffed up, so not good. Now, in hand, these all feel well constructed and very similar to the official ones. Wouldn't be surprised if they used the exact same molds as Nintendo, because overseas manufacturing. But yes, each piece and all the details seem identical, and that also means you should be able to use these with most of the Joy-Con accessories out there. The rails connect and slide into everything the same way with no noticeable resistance. The plastic seems good quality, most of the inputs do too, and they all weigh less than the official ones, which makes sense considering they must be using some different parts and they're missing things like NFC and an IR camera. Now let's get a little detailed about these buttons and sticks. All the face buttons work well, they reset quickly, but each set feels and sounds slightly different. The black ones are the least firm, the green ones land in the middle and feel a bit more hollow, and the Splatoon ones are the firmest. The shoulder buttons on the black one feel a bit loose at the top, but they're rigid on the sides and they sound hollow. The green ones are very loose, they almost feel like they're going to pop right off, and they're also the clickiest. And the Splatoon ones work the best with the least amount of travel. The triggers on the black ones are very springy with this metallic feedback. Same for the green ones, but the right ones have more of a high-pitched metallic sound with a very clicky actuation. And the Splatoon ones feel just like the official ones. Aside from that, all the other miscellaneous buttons feel about the same across each, except that the SL and SR buttons on the black ones seem to lack an actuation point. They just sound silent, and you can't really tell if you're pressing them in or not. And finally, the analog sticks. All of these feel identical to the official ones. They're tiny, soft, and rubbery with a very small amount of travel distance. For those wondering, no, they're not Hall effect joysticks, so I am expecting these to eventually start drifting after some heavy use. But so far, they work and feel the same as the official ones. Let's talk features, starting with battery. All of these claim to have a 500 milliamp battery, 25 less than the official ones, and they say that should last 16 to 25 hours. So far, they've all lasted more than a day with consistent wireless use. I haven't noticed anything odd about the battery life. Percentages dropped normally, and for the most part, they all held their charge pretty well, so no issues on that front. Same as the official ones, they charge when connected to the Switch, and they do work with third-party chargers, but I found that they don't work with the official charging grip. Something happens when the pins touch that makes the controllers disconnect. I tried reconnecting, but they just drop again. Now that only happens with the charging grip. They work just fine with the non-charging grip that comes with your Switch. Like I said, just use a third-party one and it should work just fine. We still have screenshot and home buttons, and yes, all three pairs can turn on the Switch, which is a huge plus. Now, all of these have basic rumble motors that are very generic, but they technically work. Same as the buttons, each feels slightly different, but pretty much they're all loud and whiny.
God, that's loud, and it sucks!
So if you don't need it, I'd suggest turning vibration off in the settings to both save your sanity and some battery life. On to motion controls. All three pairs have 6-axis gyro sensors, which have been just as accurate as the official ones. They follow motion well enough, same for speed, so yes, they are great for party games that require that. Now they're missing 2 features. Like I said earlier, they do not have NFC for Amiibo, and although they have a little visor-looking window, there is no IR camera in there, so you can't use these for games like Ring Fit, the Labo series, and a handful of other games that require it. Same as the official ones, they're wireless via Bluetooth. The connection has been near perfect so far, no drop-offs or random flickering disconnects. Surprising. Now, when you first pair them, in the menu, they show up as normal Joy-Cons. They even match the colors, which is interesting. In the settings, I've tested all the inputs which work correctly. You can even remap the inputs like the official ones. You can calibrate the analog sticks. Same for motion controls. But when I try to update them, it gave me this error message. At first, I thought this was an issue because some games like Switch Sports require a Joy-Con update, but after it fails, it just lets you use them. So for the most part, I don't think that's an issue. Now, over the last week, I've played with all 3 pairs of these for hours on end, mostly with intense shooters where precision and timing are everything, so this way I can easily notice any kind of issues, and so far, they've held up pretty well. Be it in wireless or handheld modes, I didn't experience any missed inputs, the analog sticks seem pretty accurate, out of the box they're not drifting, the motion controls did feel a bit floaty, but I'd say on the same level as the official ones. Overall, I'm honestly impressed. I've heard some bad things about these, but I didn't experience any of that. They just feel like normal Joy-Cons. So where do I stand with these? As someone with, let's call them small roommates who have sticky hands and are known to rough up Joy-Cons with party games, these are a must-have. So much so that I ended up buying 2 more of the Splatoon ones. I just feel much more comfortable having them use these over the full-priced official Joy-Cons, but even for myself, I attached a grip on these and they work really well. Now, that's not to say they're as durable or will last as long as the official ones. For all I know, these can just randomly stop working next week, so I'd recommend only buying these through Amazon Prime, because if there is a problem, you can easily return them to get your money back.
You know, I always knew you had it in you. I told everyone about you. I told them you could do this, and here you are. So you proved me right. So that's our extensive history of over 53 Nintendo Switch controllers. The scary thing, I missed so many. In fact, I have like 20 sitting on the desk over there.
Yeah, I just don't have enough time to do it by myself.
So now I'll hand it off to you. Let us know which you love, which you hate. Tell us how you use them. Did we miss any? All that fun stuff. Let's talk down in the comments. Also, if you're looking to pick up any of these, if they're still around, and want to support us at the same time, check out the affiliate links in the description below. Once again, I'm Sergio IM. Thanks for liking and subscribing, and I'll see you for the next box. If you like this video and want to help us out, click that thumbs up button and leave a comment below so we can talk. Now, if you want to go further, subscribe and ding the bell to stay notified whenever we post a new video. You made it to the end, and I just want you to know that you are the reason we do what we do. This is Sergio AM, and I'll see you for the next box.